We had a Congress that knowingly permitted national security officials to brazenly lie to the public under oath without consequence or even correcting the record. This is a felony, mind you. The most senior intelligence official in the United States of America, General James Clapper, he's the director of national intelligence, was asked by Senator Ron Wyden, one of the good guys on surveillance oversight, if exactly this kind of theorized mass surveillance was occurring, if the NSA was in any way collecting records about millions of Americans, and it looked like this, testimony under oath. Unfortunately, a few months later, after journalists finally had the truth of the matter in their hands, they found that that was not true. But this raises a more serious question of, does government lie? It raises this central question, right? Of, okay, if we can't trust the statements of Congress that are made under oath, if we can't trust the courts to get to the truth of the matter, of the most extreme applications of national governmental force, who's really in charge of government? Are we, as we were intended to be, partner to government as citizens, or are we instead becoming once again something closer to subject to it? Are we losing our seat at the table of government? What do we do when the ordinary system of oversight breaks down? What happens when even the most well-designed systems of checks and balances fail comprehensively? I argue this is where we're forced to rely upon democracy's safeguard of last resort. This is the fourth estate, meaning our press, protected by the First Amendment, in alliance with whistleblowers, which are better known traditionally just as sources, journalistic sources. Unfortunately, we're seeing that the ability of journalists to operate free from interference, even in what are traditionally considered liberal and open societies, such as Canada and Australia, are coming under threat. We've seen within classified documents published by the GCHQ, which is the British version of the NSA and our closest sort of signals intelligence partner, that investigative journalists are considered a threat more serious than hackers, but one step less serious than terrorists. This should inevitably lead us to consider what kind of world we will be facing should governments and other powerful institutions, such as corporations, actually succeed in countering the threat of journalism that they are perceiving. What would it mean? If we only knew what governments wanted us to know, we wouldn't know very much at all. Think about it. Can you think of a case recently in which the government knowingly violated the law, whether domestic or international, and for fear of consequence, embarrassment, politics, or any other reason sought to conceal that fact from the public? Think about what we wouldn't know about having the lever of adversarial journalism. We don't have to be talking specifically about national security either. What about official footage, dash or body cameras from police shootings? But when we do go back, what about drone strikes and where they go wrong? Things get darker from there. We ran in this country an officially sanctioned program of torture. That's the finding of our own Senate, right? Not a conspiracy theory, not some fringe news piece. But the Senate didn't make that program public out of the goodness of their hearts. They were not searching for accountability. That was a story that was first broken by journalists. And in fact, the only American ever to go to jail for the CIA torture program is the CIA worker who revealed it, confirmed it on national news, John Kiriakou. But let's look at it from the other side. Many argue that extraordinary powers, right, such as these, are necessary for protecting us or keeping us safe. They use reassuring political language. Perhaps this is true. But we should always be aware that we may not get to choose what it is that we're actually being protected from. Now, I would like to ask you about a particular story that's fairly well known here. This is written by a professor at Georgetown, Alvaro Bedoya, and he wrote about a famous case. Now, the FBI was investigating someone, a prominent religious leader, sort of cleric inside the United States. And the FBI said this guy was in contact with foreign radicals. He's possibly a threat The Attorney General himself was briefed on the case, personally approved wiretaps, said, this is fine, this is what we should be doing, even though this was a US citizen, even though he was born here. He was placed on a watch list to be detained in the event of a national emergency to make sure he couldn't cause trouble. And of everybody the FBI was tracking at the time, the head of the FBI's domestic intelligence unit said he thought this guy was the most dangerous from the standpoint of national security. Do you recognize this case? That assessment, that he was the greatest national security threat that we were facing, this was the person we needed to be protected from, was made 2 days after he gave the I Have a Dream speech. Now, of course, we have seen reforms since then. We had the Church Committee in 1975, which struck what we were told was a grand bargain. The executive would retain all of these powers, but we would get new courts, intrusive courts, that would rigorously scrub the activities of these agencies. We would get congressional oversight committees in both the House and the Senate who would see everything that was going on, who would never be lied to, who would never be misled, who could make sure that these things were rigorously overseen. And for a time it worked. But
only on Be Positive.
Some time, many decades, after things go on, people get comfortable, things begin to change. We start to see things fail at the edges. Now the people who sit on those intelligence oversight committees get more than twice as much in terms of campaign contributions from people working for intelligence agencies, contractors, a private war-making industry, than does any other person in the Congress. They have incentives not to look too hard, not to look too closely. And this is not, again, to say the system can't work. This is not to say this is the end of the world. This is to say that we must always be skeptical. We must always recognize that it is the reflex, perhaps properly, perhaps improperly, of governments to conceal, to deceive, and mislead their publics because they think it's the right thing to do. They think it's for a good reason. And it is for this reason that we must reject from our vocabulary terms like national security. Anything that has the word homeland in it should make you a little bit nervous because they mean different things to politicians than they do to you. National security is what Martin Luther King was a threat to, right? These are euphemisms not for saving lives, but for political stability, for the continuity of the status quo, that are intended to popularize things that cannot be justified in plain language with common definitions. This is why they're looking for new words. And this is where I have to pivot. I apologize, we'll go a little bit long. But why this matters so much now. This is not just happening here, right? In Russia last year, they passed what they called an anti-terrorism package, the Yorovaya Paket. Russians call it the Big Brother law. And if Russians are calling surveillance law the Big Brother law, you know there's a problem. China is passing new intrusive surveillance bills that are modeled after the US's own bills very carefully so that the US cannot criticize them for using the same powers to abuse their citizens' rights. We are witnessing the construction of a world in which the most common political value is fear. From Washington to Moscow, from Beijing to Berlin, we are all too frequently hearing from the most powerful officials arguing that we are living in the midst of a period of unprecedented danger. Every day, some new threat, that the threats we face today are greater than ever, and therefore, things must change. We must depart from tradition. Since the turning of the millennium, the last decade, this has given rise to a creeping authoritarianism, a belief that the single most important factor in determining the direction of our society
only on Be Positive
are the desires of our government, where the morality of a given thing has become less important than the simple lawfulness of it. This is a system called legalism. If it is legal, then it doesn't matter. That's the end of the conversation. Hard-won prohibitions from history are being overturned or ignored on the basis of nothing more than a claim that this has become necessary because these are dangerous times.
If you want to understand the world, find out where we're being taken, what the goal is, and then the world just opens up. Oh, so that's why they're doing that. Oh, so that's why that's happening. Instead of, what's happening? What's happening? Oh, what are they doing that for? It becomes so clear. And what you do is then you take control of your perception. Because it's very difficult to manipulate people, impossible to manipulate people when you understand the game. Because how does problem, reaction, solution manipulate you when you understand how it works? How does the totalitarian tiptoe manipulate you when you understand how it works? Know the game, and you can win the game. Just stay calm. We are an infinite point of eternal consciousness on an eternal journey of exploring all possibility. That's as bad as it gets. This is just an experience. We can make it a nice experience. We can make it an unpleasant experience. We have the power to choose. It's about time we realize that, because when enough people do, this cult is history. We need to appreciate the difference between those that control the microphones and so many people, not all by any means, but so many people and gathering in number who don't get to the microphones. You see the activists and the climate cult activists and the frickin' transgender activists and all that, and the politically correct activists, and then you talk to the public and you see a completely different perception to that. But because they dominate the microphones, as of course they do because that's the agenda, people can get the impression that that's what the population thinks. It doesn't. My father used to say, the silent majority is silent because it's got nothing to say. It's time for the silent majority to speak. And when we do, things will change, but not until. It simply comes to self-respect. I ask people, what are you doing allowing someone else to tell you what to think, to tell you what you can say, to tell you what you can believe? What are you doing? Where's your self-respect? And we live in a world of psychological fascism where people are constantly seeking to impose their beliefs on other people. We see it with religion all the time. We see it with the woke mentality all the time. I believe this, so you must believe that. And if people acquiesce to that, then tyranny rules. And if we don't, if we say, you can call me what you like, and people do, I don't care. Call me this, call me that, call me the other. Well, thanks for sharing that with me. Have a nice day. But you say it anyway. And if enough people say it and refuse to bow to this psychological tyranny, imposing on our lives what we can be, what we can say, what we can think, the number of people being imposed upon is vast compared with the number of people doing the imposing. Stiffen the backbone, grow a pair, say what you believe, have self-respect in your own uniqueness, and don't let anyone take it away. And if we live in a world of multiple uniqueness, where everyone is celebrating their own uniqueness, all part of the same consciousness, yes, but their own unique point of attention, then that true diversity means tyranny can't reign. What does every tyranny want to do? Centralize everything, including perception. The more we celebrate our uniqueness, the more we are withdrawing from the ability of the few at the center to dictate to everybody. You will think this. I won't. You will say that. You won't say that. I will. What are they going to do? Why do people acquiesce and self-censor? Fear. Get rid of fear, the world changes. Because the world is controlled by fear. Delete fear, delete control.